It's over?
It's over.
That's it?
You
Oh,
graduated.
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay,
For new
so-
students, we should tell them that. It's just
Alright.
people come in, clap for you. And
That's
get
it.
to the
Oh,
game.
yeah. So Lori is in charge of this one. So she will introduce, right,
Yeah.
Lori?
Yep, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to
Okay.
go.
So Lori's gonna introduce. Go ahead.
Andrew, are you ready to go?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to turn so they can see
Yeah.
her, maybe?
Yeah.
You guys can see Lori.
Oh, hi
Hello.
all. It's so
Yep, turn it back.
oh God. Look at that. Wow. Well, it's great to see everyone here. It's foggy. That's not a surprise, and it's nice to be here, step away from the news cycle for a half hour and celebrate Andrew. So it's really my pleasure to be here with Rachel and Eric and all of you as we celebrate this tremendous accomplishment. Andrew Cook's story collection, Ask the Moon. Ask the Moon is what some might call a link story collection, others a novel in stories. It's told through 4 points of view, Harry, Goldie, Pilar, and Memo. The stories are set in the world of music, the world of musicians, and the structure of the book reflects that. It's an old style record with a side A with 5 stories and a side B with 5 stories. I'll have Andrew talk a little bit more about that later, but I just want to talk a little bit about Andrew himself and kind of the process of working with him, because I met Andrew, I think pretty much exactly 2 years ago. Yep. And I knew immediately that though it might be his first semester at Regis, he was not at the beginning of things as a writer. Already he had a sensibility and a voice, an understanding of craft, and perhaps most important, a commitment to revision. Years ago, I was at the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and I was in a group meeting with a senior editor from a publishing house. And she noted that authors generally fell into 2 groups when she was working with them. Those who kind of took her feedback and came at it almost in a kind of letter of the law sort of way. And then there were the others, the ones who would just take the feedback and run with it, who saw the questions and commentary and concerns as pure opportunity. That is the kind of writer that Andrew is, a writer who sees what I would call the question within the question and comes back with revisions that surprise me in all the best ways. So, Andrew, read to us, please, from Ask the Moon.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lori. I'm going to read to you from the beginning of the last story in the collection. This last story is called. So who can see me?
People already do.
Oh, the people on Zoom. Okay. Hi, people. Hi. This story has a word that's hard to pronounce. Can anybody say that word? It's mirroring. It's the word mirror, and then it goes backwards. That's the name of the band that these 2 characters, Harry and Pilar, had together. And so this story is about the recording of their album, which happened 25 years in the past. And the story is written as liner notes, in the format of liner notes. Do you guys know what liner notes are? You know, within an album, just little notes about each song. So the story takes place within the liner notes. I'm going to read for you just a brief introduction. You get the listing of the names of the songs, and then we'll hear the first set of liner notes for just the first song. Okay? So this is Mirroring. This album, Ask the Moon, was remastered and reissued for its 25th anniversary due to increased interest after the inclusion of 1 track as the theme music for the AMC drama Hot Knife. The liner notes below were contributed by Guillermo Memo Aguilar Cervantes, the original producer and engineer who recorded and mixed everything at Estudios Viraje, Zacatecas, Mexico in 1999. Side A, track 1, Ask the Moon. Track 2, Blue Thing. Track 3, Casi Siempre Contigo. Track 4, God Damn Them All. Track 5, Tibidabo. Side B, track 6, Visage. Track 7, Que coño quieres que haga? K8, track 8, The Wreck of the Human Heart. Track 9, Exquisite Corpse, Part 1, Spooky Distance. Part 2, Complicated Tango. Part 3, Hot Knife. Track 10, ICFILWY. Mirroring are Pilar Monreal Ibargüengoitia, who plays Fender Gemini steel string acoustic guitar, Yamaha CG 101 Spanish guitar, piano, Hammond B3 organ, vibraphone, percussion, and vocals. And Harry Lee Stills, Ibanez Artcore hollow body electric guitar, cello, Fender Jazz electric bass, double bass, cajon, keyboard, percussion, and vocals. And these liner notes were written by the producer, Memo Aguilar Cervantes. Side A, track 1, Ask the Moon, music and lyrics by Harry Stills. Listen, it was obvious that Harry had fallen in love with Pilar, and just as obvious that everything was doomed. What's the point anyway? Falling in love only ever leaves you ruined and alone, so why do we do it to ourselves? This is the question that won't leave my mind as I write these notes and sink into these old tunes, all of which are some version of a love song, written and recorded some 25 years ago when we were all just pups. This first song, Ask the Moon, was the last recording we made, so it kind of compressed everything about the whole experience of making this album into one tune. All the silliness and anger and horniness and drama. And because it's a Harry song, the lyrics are completely oblique. But I know it had something to do with a moment near the end when Harry and Pilar were arguing out on the street. I peeked out and saw the two of them silhouetted in moonlight. She cursed at him, jutted an arm up at the moon, and the next day he came in with this song. Something meaningful happened that night. At least that's my theory. The tune was something Harry and Pilar worked out together. She did a figure in a minor key on the Hammond organ while he fingerpicked that guitar line on the hollow body. I drenched the intro with reverb for that spacey feeling. I guess the words are about asking the moon for guidance and getting no reply. But I'm pretty sure it's really about how he felt about me and Pilar hooking up. He could see what was happening. When he did the vocals in the booth, I saw him wiping tears off his cheeks. Full disclosure, I might have made him do more takes than necessary to either A, give him time to compose himself before stepping out of the booth, or B, make him suffer. Probably a little of both. Then, when his vocals were done, he took the guitar and went out the door without discussing any of the harmonies with Pilar. That was weird. They always worked out the harmonies together. It was kind of their whole thing. I sure wasn't going to be able to do it. So Pilar went into the booth alone and did some really beautiful parts because, of course, she's a pro and she's got that voice. Satin. I've never been able to understand why Harry and Pilar didn't become world-famous rock stars. They had all the chops, more than most rock stars you've heard of. Their albums should be in everyone's record collection like Fleetwood Mac or Arcade Fire. People should be singing these songs in the shower, in the car on the way to work, or late at night in the low-light living room with a cocktail and a cigarette. Part of the background hum of the cultural zeitgeist. Why weren't they hungry for it? Or maybe this, did I screw it all up by throwing everything out of balance? At the time, I didn't have the musical chops myself, but I already had the hunger for it, and I could see how Harry and Pilar, how good they were together. I suggested offsetting the harmonies on the chorus where they're singing tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. She did it in 3 overlapping parts. So when we layered in Harry's voice, it stacked up in 4-part harmony. Still gives me the goddamn shivers. And I could admit, I was jealous of that, how good they sounded together. Even I could tell that their harmonies made the song. When we mixed a couple of weeks later, Harry was sullen about it. He wanted his levels up and Pilar's backed off. And I humored him in the moment, but later I tweaked the mix to give him that dry, in-your-ear purr like his hero, Leonard Cohen. And I edged Pilar up, panned left, right, and center with that delicious spaciousness of the reverb delay combo. I think she never sounded better. I guess the proof is in the final recording, and that's why we put it as the album opener, the sound of the end, right at the beginning. Stop that.
Good job.
I'm really happy that you decided to read that section, Andrew. Andrew and I kind of exchanged emails yesterday about he was planning to read that and then he was thinking maybe he should do something else. But I'm really glad that you read it. I remember how when I got to that piece at the very end and hearing Memo's voice kind of after learning about each of these characters and dropping in on these very specific pieces of their lives, how that piece kind of, that story just kind of filled in the trajectory in a sense, and in this voice that I really loved. So in my introduction, I talked a lot about you as a reviser, I think. Well, I want to kind of jump to the beginning now, and I just would like you to talk about how this book came about, because I could easily imagine it having started with character, but then I could easily imagine it also kind of starting with this concept that you had here, this idea to do a side A and a side B and to write about music. Or I wonder whether there was just some sort of question that you were trying to answer. But if you could just kind of lay out for us how this book started.
Sure. Thanks for that question. Of the 10 stories, the oldest one I wrote about 5 years ago. It's called Young Americans, and Harry was the principal character in that book. He was sort of a surrogate for myself. And then a couple years ago, when I wanted to join this program, I wanted to write a fresh new story to see if I could get accepted to Regis Mile High MFA, and I wrote a second story, and I just borrowed that same character because it seemed like the simplest thing to do. I needed another sort of self-surrogate. I'm not going to call the guy Andrew, so I called him Harry, and kind of projected myself in some ways into that character. And so then that was the beginning of an inkling that, oh, maybe I can just keep writing stories about that guy. But also he wasn't the most interesting character to me. Just like I'm not, like, of my friends, look at my friends, look how beautiful my friends are. Let's just take a moment. And I'm the least interesting person of the people that I know. And so I wanted to write more about, different dimensions of different kinds of characters. And so that was the beginning, was that idea of kind of refracting my own experiences and stealing the experiences of my friends and kind of tying that all together. So it was kind of like a character beginning. But at the same time, for many, many years, I've played in bands and performed live and written music. And what I love about that is how it's such a culture, and it has its own vernacular, the language, the vocabulary of live music and performance and gigging and all of that stuff. And I wanted to capture some of that and share some of that, because I've never really seen that anywhere in fiction before. And so as those character pieces kind of accumulated, and female characters and male characters and different dimensions of characters, they all ended up bending towards music in one way or another, because that's just what I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm. And then, well, first of all, I'm just going to say that I'm pretty sure your friends would not agree that you are the least interesting. And they can just nod, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. But so then at what point, I'm just interested in the structure, because the structure, it's one of those cases where the structure of this story fits so perfectly. At what point did you realize I'm doing a side A and a side B, and this is going to be?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but one of the authors that influenced me so much was Jennifer Egan, with her I don't know if it's a novel or a collection. That's kind of what I like about it. A Visit from the Goon Squad, and how each chapter or each story takes a different focus, a different character. And I wanted to do something like that. And that was what from the beginning, what I wanted was to write chapters which are standalone short stories. You could read any of them out of sequence. There's a beginning and an end. There's the payoff in each of them, but they all form a larger arc as well. That was always what I wanted to do from the beginning. And then I think about how I love to listen to albums as well. I don't like to just listen to one song. I want to listen to the whole thing, and how you get that sense of a journey from beginning to end. And since I was writing about music, it just seemed like it was an obvious thing to do a side A and a side B. I love the kind of analog aspect of it as well. The idea that it's a little bit old fashioned. And yeah.
No, I love that about it. I have more, I could ask you more questions about that, but I want to go to Rachel. And
Okay, here's my question. What's this book about?
No. Oh,
Okay,
no, that's the
so-
hardest question.
Okay, so as I read, I kept thinking, and this happened the first time we worked together, and then you worked with Lori, and then I got to read, the revision after however long it was. And both times I had this experience when I was reading your book where I kept thinking, oh, it's a book about this. And then I would be like, no, it's a book about this. Right. And then eventually I would come to this place. Both times I came to this place where I was like, oh, it's a book about all these things.
Yeah.
Right. And so then I was left thinking each time, like, how did you do that? Like, how is this a book equally about so many different things? It's almost like each story resonates with at least 2 or 3 others thematically in a way that I think that's why, because I would be like, oh, this story resonates with this story thematically in this way. And I'd be like, okay, it's a book about this. But then it would also resonate, like this story would resonate with this story, which also resonated with that first story. And then I'd be like, oh no, it's a book about all that, right?
Yeah.
It was so fascinating.
Yeah.
So even, in the way that musicians are recognizable when you hear bits of different pieces of music, it's almost like you're doing that thematically in addition to like sentence by sentence wise. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the magic of that?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I don't know how that happens, but it's
This is a selfish question.
it's kind of like what I mentioned in class today when we were talking about stories that have different levels. Like there's just the scene level of the events that happen. There's the character level of how the characters change, but there's also a thematic level of some, like a bigger idea. And so I'm always looking for the different layers that stuff is developing on. So like there's one story is about a woman who's in a rock and roll band and she's on tour, and the whole story is just about her tour experiences. But during that tour, she's reading an astrophysics book, a Brian Greene book of astrophysics, something that has no connection to rock and roll at all. But it's what's in this character's mind the whole time because it's her escape from her daily experiences. So at night after her gigs, instead of getting wasted with the rest of the band, she goes to the hotel and she reads her astrophysics book and puts herself to sleep. And so there's a lot of sort of her mind turning over these huge cosmic questions about gravity and dark matter and attraction and all of these things on a cosmic scale. And then that lent itself to the structure of that story, where each section is named after a part of that astrophysics book. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's one way I try to think of each of these stories is what are the different layers that are on top of them. And then like there's other stories in here that also have cosmic themes, like the one about there's an astronaut that goes to the moon, right? So those kinds of things can kind of like resonate across. But I can't say it's really an intentional thing. I just like working with that depth.
And so that's interesting because I think you did answer the question because you have this sort of through thread on all 3 of those layers, but so at the sentence level, I can see, like I can recognize the way you construct sentences from throughout every story, right? But then maybe on that top level of that thematic, this one, because it has this cosmic element, ties to the astronaut story, which ties to this other one. So it kind of skips, like maybe it's like a thread that loops between a couple, but maybe not all, right? Okay, so you did answer that question. It's really good. Okay, so then the other follow-up question is, do you work on those 3 levels all at once, or do you come back to be like, okay, now I'm working on the astrophysics realm? Like how does that work in your process?
Definitely coming back to it because my initial draft is just written longhand, and it's a mess. My friend Ian, we're in a writing group together. He had an insightful comment. He said, when I write a rough draft, I flood the zone. I just like flood everything I can possibly think of, put in that first draft, and then start chipping it away. And then through revision, like with him, my other writing group or whatever workshop I'm in, start chipping away and figuring out what is it really about. I'll always asking that question. What's it really about? Like, what is this character actually focused on? What's the thing that needs to change? And like, then it's like by chipping things away, that's where you get that topography. We can see what that top level is. Like, this island here and this island there. And I can just drain this other stuff.
Oh, that's a good metaphor.
That's it.
I like that guy.
That's
That's
I
good.
wanna-
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
I want to stick with this idea of revision, which is where it's really gone, and where when I was thinking about today, I thought so much of what we were going to talk about would be a revision, because you really are, I don't know, you're just really a fantastic reviser. And so when I revise, I have this phase that my wife always calls just that I'm just mad at my work. I'm just but those moments then are followed by like almost this euphoria when I figure something out. And I feel like with you, you're never mad, but you somehow get the euphoria. Like maybe I don't see you when you're mad, but I always feel like you come back and I read your revision. I'm like, wow, but you're just there calmly, like it was predetermined. And so I want to stick with this kind of this discussion that Rachel opened up, because I wondered about it also. And I thought if you could maybe just walk us through, I don't know, a couple of the moments of euphoria by way of getting at your revision process, like something that maybe you were mad about, but that, and then how that happens.
Yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. I never thought about it as being mad, but I do relate to that. I can give an example that involves your comments the first time that you read it. You
You got mad at me.
yeah. Well, you gave me a really difficult note. I don't know if you realized how difficult it was.
Probably not. Sorry.
But in the story that I just read, it was originally narrated by a completely different character who was related to these other characters in a kind of a tangential way. And you said it doesn't really make sense to have this completely like peripheral character narrate the final story in the collection. And you had the insight that it makes so much more sense for it to be Memo, who is one of the principal characters. And we knew that there was this triangle between all these characters. And I was like, yeah, you're right, but God, what a pain in the ass. I can't, how do I change? Oh my God. It's like, damn it. So I was mad about that. I mean, mostly I wasn't mad at you. I was grateful to you, but I was mad at myself for not having even, it had never even occurred to me. That was never, I wasn't even looking in that direction. But once you made me look in that direction, I realized, oh, it only makes sense for Memo to be the narrator of that story, which I think was your comment as well, Laura. You said you couldn't even imagine that it wasn't the case from the beginning.
Yeah, no, I remember when you told me kind of the backstory and how that came about, because for me, it was just a given. This is perfect. Memo told, he's the one, because he's the one that observes them all. He's the one that's he's the one that creates that album, but he's really, he's the observer of all of them. He's, like in one of my favorite stories, the bunny story, he just kind of shows up and knows how to push people in a certain direction, and let them shine or do what they need to do.
Right.
I'm looking at the time, and I think we should also see whether there are questions in the audience.
Can I say one more thing just to follow that up? Because I want to say clearly that, you had to write the end as it was first in order for me to see that loop that could be closed. Right. Yeah. So it's never that these ideas, or like with Lauren's, the chorus, right? We kept talking about like, but what is the bigger picture? Like, how do we what is that loop that's left to close in the, it's like sewing, right? There's like one that's not quite cinched in there yet, right? And so I think we always have to write the thing in order to figure out what the thing actually is that pulls it all together. Yeah. So yeah. Okay, so questions. Oh, questions abound. Okay, Melissa, what do you got?
Well, I remember last summer, and I didn't know Andrew, but before the residency, getting, typing of everything's work and reading his story and thinking, this is one of the best short stories I've ever read. I mean, anywhere, it published, unpublished ever. There's such a strong voice. There is a sense of humor. He's just so captured the rock and roll world. So it's just fun. And the music, his background in music shows up in all of these details, which we may not, if we're not musicians, we don't quite understand, but it just lends such authenticity to it. And then in his language, it's lyrical, it's rhythmic, it's just beautiful. And I would like for you to talk a little bit more about your experience as a musician, how that intersects with your writing. Were you a musician? I think you're still a musician, but were you writing before when you were a musician? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I've been, writing songs and playing guitar and doing stuff like that since I was in my 20s or teens, really, and also writing at the same time, and doing a bunch of other stuff. And it was just very, very scattered and just like whatever came out and undisciplined until it seems like until pretty recently, when I was able to actually kind of really focus. And I have a band. Denise, my girlfriend there, is the drummer. I'm the guitar player. We're called First Timers. We haven't played in a while, but we'll play sometime soon. Carden and I, they are in a songwriter group. So yeah, there's music still going on, and many of the themes that are in these stories are also things that I'm writing songs about. Thanks for the question and the compliment, Melissa. I appreciate it. Yeah. Jeff?
I have a comment and a question. They're kind of loosely tied together, but my comment first, Andrew, I've been fortunate enough to share online classroom space with Andrew. We're about 3 classes now. Yeah. And every time he has expanded my TBR list, every time. And so it's fitting that you did it again tonight. So I appreciate it with the Jennifer Engel. So I appreciate that.
Egan.
Excuse me. That being said, I was wondering, you have such an expansive kind of reading repertoire, kind of mental library. And just like, musicians, they take from other, they take inspiration from other musicians. Yeah. You can listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan and think, oh, that's a Jimi Hendrix lick. You can listen to Eric Clapton and go, oh, that's Robert Johnson. I mean, even though outside of Crossroads, right? That's Robert Johnson. When you did that, or when you were writing, did you find that you were going back to maybe some standards, some classics, some things that were touchstones for you, literary wise? Yeah. And then how did you structure your album, your book? Did you do it like to tell a theme through line, or did you do it, as like, I want to hit the listener or the reader in the face every single time? So what were those types of decisions that you were making?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, there were so many influences that were haunting me, that I kept going back to again and again. One of the wonderful things about this program was how it forced me to do a lot of reading that I might not have done otherwise, and also to be accountable for it. So I read a lot of short story collections that were fantastic. I'm thinking of Olive Kittredge, which I can't remember, Lori, if you recommended that or if that was Jenny Shank.
I would, if I didn't, I would have. I love Olive Kittredge, but it might have been Jenny when you worked with her. Yeah,
I mean, it's like thematically, it completely different from what I've done, but in structure, like those are short stories that stand alone, but they accrue greater depth and meaning when you look at them all as a whole. And so, like looking at stuff and trying to rip off techniques and just like tone and mood, like how do you end in a way that feels like an ending, but also makes you want to go on to the next piece to find out what else happens. I can't even put my finger on what that is, but that was what I was looking for and trying to pull off. And also to go back to Jennifer Egan again, how innovative she is with form and structure. There's a chapter in that book that's all PowerPoint slides. And it's one of the most effective stories I've ever read. It makes me cry every time I read it. It's so powerful. And that is exactly what made me write a story in liner notes. Like, and how can I rip off her idea? Like, really, it was like, well, what's a format I can use? And that led me directly to the liner notes idea, and that idea that you can embed a story in almost any structure, and make that work. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, one last question, Lori.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we have time for one last question, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just curious, so in that story, there's a whole track list and instrument notes of who played what. Are those inspired from real songs, or are they all completely created for this story?
Thanks for that question. It's the reverse. I wrote the story first, and I've started writing the songs since then, which is weird because I like wrote myself into a corner. So there's actual like lyrics. There's lyrics in there, like, oh, I have to make this work now in a friggin' song. But I've been going into a studio and working with a dude I know and starting to record these. Yeah, so eventually there'll be a 10-track album. It won't be the exact same because I'm already cutting corner, giving myself outs, but it's going to be a variation. It'll be a musical variation on what this book is. I would love to. Yeah.
Is it going to be on vinyl?
I hope so. It's got to be on vinyl. Gate folds and the sleeve and it folds out. Yeah, that's my vision for it.
Who else has an album and a matching book?
And I would add to that, if Andrew wrote this critical preface for this piece, and it is completely bonkers. It is such a crazy I mean that as a compliment. It's just
that's the very best compliment. Thank you.
Yeah, no. There's the blurb for it. It's bonkers. It's just
completely bonkers.
Ceremony, an excerpt of it.
Oh yeah, I am going to read an excerpt of it at the degree ceremony.
Excellent. So anyway, I hope all of you will join me in congratulating Andrew on his MFA. Okay.
Nice
Bye. I know, I feel you're all there and here I go. Bye-bye. Congratulations.
Thank you. Hi, Nick. Thanks for coming.
Is that like someone else is giving feedback on the album?
What's that?
Is that the critical preface? Is that someone talking about it?